Welcome to The Human Experience, a podcast about the stories we live out every day and the importance of championing the vulnerability and courage of the storyteller. I'm your host, Jennifer Peterkin, and it was through my own lived story of experiencing domestic violence that this podcast was created. By traveling the globe and interviewing each guest in person, I am convinced now more than ever that stories have the power to change the world. You can join our community of storytellers by subscribing, leaving a rating and review, signing up for my newsletter, following me on Instagram, and more. Thank you for being here. In a world full of noise, to listen with intention is an act of resistance. Rebecca Faye Smith Galli. Okay, perfect. So that is your author name, but your friends call you Becky.
Right.
So are we calling you Becky today?
Sure.
Okay.
Yes.
Hi,
Absolutely.
Becky.
If I can call you Jen.
Yes, you absolutely can. Thank you so much for sitting down with me in your home, your beautiful home. We're in Maryland. And are you from Maryland?
No, I'm a Tar Heel born and bred. I was actually born in Chapel Hill, North Carolina, and I wound up going to school there. But after college, moved to Atlanta and then moved to Baltimore.
Okay.
And so I've been here since early 80s.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Long time.
Yeah. Have you been in this house since then?
No.
Okay.
Here about 15 years.
Okay. But it's a gorgeous house. You've done a great job with it. And I love all of your pictures of your family.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, it was, we had to do some modifications for the wheelchair, but it really is very livable. And upstairs have bedrooms, so I call it my bed and breakfast. Please come visit.
I like it.
Have plenty of room upstairs for visitors.
Perfect. So we're here for your story today, obviously. But if I ask you, where does your story begin? Where would you start that?
My story began. Well, I would say if you're looking at story in terms of changes and pivots, I'm going to call them. I think the first one would be when I was 20 years old. I grew up in a family of faith, 5 of us. I was the oldest. My brother was the middle, and we had a younger sister. And Forrest was the only boy. He used to tell his mom, "I'm your only begotten son." But he was that kid. He grew up to be, he was just a natural leader. He was president of student council in high school. He was a musician, an athlete, leader in our church. And at age 17, he was water skiing and hit a pier and was unconscious for 9 days and later died.
Oh, my goodness.
So at age 20, our beautiful family, close-knit by design family, was reduced to what I call a foreign configuration of 4, where I lost my brother, and our family really dealt with something unimaginable that a kid with that much potential would die suddenly. And so there was a lot of learning that took place at that time about how to handle loss, how to make room for grief, how to be patient with the process of reconfiguring your life after something like that happens, and honoring Forrest, his role, but there was almost like this presence of the absence. You know, he was with us in spirit, but we lost a lot of things that were part of our family. You know, just his interest, you know, the baseball games and, you know, the concerts and things that he used to do were no longer part of our lives. So we really had to change a lot after that loss. So yeah, I think that was kind of the moment that I've carried a lot of these lessons with me throughout every challenge I've had, and I've had quite a few since then. But I later learned that watching my parents adjust to the loss of a son and how they coped with that was very instructive for me, as I had to cope with future challenges and losses. And our family actually dealt very differently with the grief. And I think that was another learning that there's not one right way to grieve. My dad was a minister and could very publicly talk about his loss, and later wrote a book about it, became a noted lecturer on grief. My mom was much more private and joined support groups for women who and families that had lost children. I was in college, and so I went back to my college buddies, and they kind of helped move me through with the structure of college life. They knew Forrest, but they knew me better and just tried to support me that way. But my sister was younger and in high school with him. And so it wasn't just a loss for her. It was a community loss. Everybody knew Forrest, and she actually wanted to be with him. And so we had to get her some professional counseling to help her move through that. But I learned that, no matter how you grieve, the thing, we were very honest with what our grief was doing to us, and we found support for that, whatever it took. For me, it was my friends. For Rachel, she had to have professional help. Dad did it publicly. Mom did it privately. And none of that's wrong, but we did keep moving through it. And that's one of the lessons I took with me.
Yeah. Grief is so hard because I think that until you are confronted with it, it's something that is it's not able to be understood. It's not able to be grasped. The depth of feeling that comes with grief, the different emotions that come with grief. And even you're walking through grief and you're also walking through life at the same time. So you're also having to contend with almost like a guilt, or even like a, why can't I move forward type of feeling when you're trying to hold both of these things in tension. The grief that is making you feel stagnant while also having to continue living your life. And I can only imagine losing somebody at that stage of life, losing children in general, is just horrifying for any parent. I can only imagine that. I do not have that experience. But especially I feel like somebody who is on the cusp of the rest of their life, how jarring that must be to all of the sudden just not have that person there anymore.
It was shocking. I think when the technical going through the stages of grief, there is really a shock. There is really this numbing that happens of your mind where you just do the next thing and you do the funeral and you go through all the processes. But then when that numbness goes away and you're left with the reality of, gosh, he's no longer there. And then the other reality is everybody else is going about their lives. They did their thing. They brought their casserole and they said the things that they hope were helpful that sometimes aren't. But, you do the best you can, getting through that and supporting other people. But it's when you're the person that the loss is most directly impacted, your life is totally different. And then others are just, theirs is pretty much business as usual.
Yeah.
And they don't realize that the grief can last a lifetime. I think it's important really to be patient with yourself as you're going through that, because we do grieve differently. And the other thing I've learned is sometimes we have to be patient with other people who think you should just kind of get over it very quickly, or say things like everything happens for a reason, or God won't give you more than you can handle, or things like that they really think are helpful. But at a core level, it's kind of hurtful to think that you would be selected to receive something especially designed for you. And it's like, come on, guys. But I've learned to really step back and say, Becky, they would not intentionally say anything that would be hurtful to you.
Yeah.
That is not their intention. And in another angle is how brave of them to try to say anything at all. Because some people are like, I have no idea what to say, so I'm just going to be quiet. So you've got these extremes, but to have patience with both of them, that, maybe they're intimidated to say anything, or maybe that's the only thing they knew to say. So, and they were brave enough to do it.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a beautiful expression of grace to have that mentality for people. And I think it's important. I also think a few years ago, I read a book called Prophetic Lament, and it was really a wonderful book about how we are not great at holding tension, especially as Westerners. And, you know, the idea that you would ever get over losing your brother is kind of weird and crazy, right? Like that's not ever something that's going to leave you. But I think when most people express this get over it mentality, it comes from a place of discomfort because we don't know how to hold that tension for ourselves or other people. And so it's something I've been trying to practice in my own life for the past several years is like, be okay with things not being okay, right? Like you can still show up. It doesn't mean that everything is terrible. It doesn't mean that you can't find joy, but it's okay if multiple things are true at once, right?
Yes. That's beautiful. I really like that way of looking at it. My dad used to say, you know, sometimes the art and the goal is to figure out how to live life with the questions.
I love that. Yes.
You know, we all want answers. Well, maybe we just need to learn how to live with the questions.
Yeah.
And I have this, I call it kind of like this mental closet in my mind. Not really a closet. It's just some open shelves and the things I don't have answers to, I try to put it on that shelf and let it just sit there, not to deny it. You know, I lost my brother. You know, I've also had some other losses, and they're all kind of on the shelves. And my job, my daily job is to keep them there, respect them, give them place, but to not look at life through them, not let them be the lens that I choose to look at daily life. So, but that is a tension, you know, and that's the part that we need to get used to.
Yeah. Yeah. It's hard. It's not an easy thing to walk through, especially when our culture isn't necessarily representative of that. We're very much like, you know, just keep moving forward, just pull yourself up by your bootstraps and everything is going to be okay. And it's okay if things aren't okay. And I've also found personally that there's a real liberation in living inside the questions and not needing there to be an answer all the time, because you get to then just say, well, I'm here. I don't know. And there is a beauty in the unknowing. And it means that so many things are possible. So, you know, not that that's always a comforting place to sit in. It's sometimes very uncomfortable, but I do think it's an important practice for us as human beings.
I agree with you.
So you're 20 and you're in college. How does this change the way you move through your day-to-day life after the initial wave of you're busy going through, you know, the funeral and all of, you know, being with your family? When that dies down and when everybody else goes back to normal life, what does that look like for you?
You know, I was fortunate that my dad suggested that I journal. And so when Forrest died, I was extremely sad, but I was also angry, you know, that happened. You know, why did that happen? I don't know. Why did that have to happen to Forrest? I don't know. And then there was a part of me that was like, I was just, you know, it was, his life was so beautiful. I mean, the last thing that he wrote before he went water skiing was his application to Wake Forest University. And in it, he talked about what he valued. And the last thing was talking about his family. And the last thing he wrote was, I would change nothing. And so this is the last thing this kid writes before he goes water skiing. I'm telling you, I mean, the whole thing is just like incredible. And when I thought about that, Forrest, you know, that's the last, and how it was two ways to look at that. Like, oh my gosh, he's so happy with his life. What a great way to feel about life. And my first book, that's how I ended the book, is like that's my goal every day before my head hits the pillow, to be able to say, I would change nothing.
Wow.
What a great way to live. And I think that was one half of it. But on the other half of it was like, I would change so many things. I wish you didn't hit the pier. I wish, he was waving to some girls on the beach. I was like, I wish you were looking where you were going. I wish that they were able to save you. I wish, all of these things. So there, tension, right? Yep. Exactly what you're talking about. It's like anger, sadness, disappointment. How do you carry that in a way that doesn't impact you to the point of being detrimental, to have it be a healthy grief. So in college, it was easy because that loss was really invisible. My friends knew, but not everybody knew. Back in our hometown in Hickory, everybody knew. And so there was more of a collective grief. And I think in a way that could be therapeutic. In another way, you can't escape it. There are benefits in each environment, right? But, after I did wonder, could life ever be good again? And it did. It got better. I got through college, met the man of my dreams. We got married. We had great plans. He was going to get his MBA by the time he was 30. We were going to have our first child before we were 30, and all that was clicking along according to plan. And I had my first child, beautiful baby, healthy girl. And then we wanted to increase our family. And our second son, our firstborn son, Matthew, had epilepsy, had seizures, very terrible seizures that were later diagnosed as an undiagnosed. It was actually stated as an undiagnosed disease of the central nervous system. They never really figured out what was going on, that later became degenerative for him. And that was another time of why and how and uncertainty. And I used a lot of those things I learned with forest loss about journaling and looking for answers and deciding what questions I had to live with and what things could be done, that constant struggle to figure out the right path. So that was hugely challenging. And we, of course, had genetic testing done and those kinds of things. And he was, they said it was really, they called it, quote, a fluke. That's what, very unusual. And so we had our third child, and she presented, we had her genetic, in utero, all the testing done, and everything came back fine. And she did really well. And I was pregnant again with one more child. We wanted to complete our family. And 3 months into that pregnancy, she's diagnosed with autism.
Okay.
So I have 2 special needs kids, a lot more journaling, and life got really crazy again, It was, so I can continue on that story, or we can talk about where we are. Life gets a little bit more complicated a couple years later.
Okay. So. I'm sure. Was there a feeling of why is this happening while you were going through this? I mean, I'm sure everybody struggles with that on some level, but especially what you had already been through, was there this feeling of like, why is this keep happening to me when seemingly other people don't have to deal with any of this?
Yes, it was a regular, persistent question. And we did the due diligence in terms of, have I done everything? Some people look at that and say, why did you keep having kids? And we did everything medically that we should have done and got results that nobody told us that there was any kind of danger in that. And I just had to give it up to, I don't understand it.
Yeah.
But trying to, again, push that to the side and say, I still want to live life. I I later on, as these stories became part of a career that I never knew I was going to have. I was in sales and marketing with IBM. I never knew I was going to be a writer or an author. But one of our instructors said, if you want to keep writing, you need to know why you write. And for me, I write to remind myself what I believe, which is life can be good no matter what. And I say I've had a lot of what, a lot of challenges. But you have to look for the good. You have to, and can means work. It's not life is good.
Yeah.
Life can be good. So there is this effort that has to happen of whatever limitations you are to live fully within those limitations as much as you can. And there's this rethinking what's still possible. What can you still do where you are in life? And the why question is an anchor in the wrong thing. It's an anchor in something that you can't fix. But if you pivot to how from why, that's a better question. How are you going to get through whatever you're in to keep living fully? Figure out what you can still do. Now, that's not to say I didn't spend a good amount of time in the pity pit. I did, but I learned how to get out, and there's a lot of self-discovery that needs to come in that. What keeps you up? What motivates you? Who, I call it, who can support you? Who's in your boat? That's a good person in that boat to help you get through whatever challenge is ahead of you. And you have a lot of control about that.
Yeah.
Who you talk to, who you don't talk to, what you read, what you don't read, where you put your focus is what the input you're giving your body. So that became a lot more purposeful. I think the more challenges I had, the more I realized how important that was.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's so important to have that journey. Like, I don't think anybody gets to, you don't just hop to healing, right? It's
I wish.
Yeah,
wish
right?
there was a button, yeah.
You got to walk through it. And so I don't think that there is a place where people can just transcend this journey of walking through the muck of it, of what you're actually dealing with, the grief that you're actually dealing with, but then your own internal journey of finding the right questions to ask, figuring out how to reframe your mindset so that you can have a fulfilled life. Because you are allowed that, right? You are allowed to have that no matter your circumstances, but you have to be able to frame things in a way that keeps you moving forward, I guess. So prior to having your two children with special needs, had you had any experience in that realm, just family-wise, or any experience dealing with seizures or dealing with, caring for somebody that has something like that?
I didn't know what it was. He was 3 months old, and he woke up with, we had the baby monitor on, and we woke up with these sounds coming from the monitor. And I went in there, and he was like flat on the bed, and his little arms were raised, and his head was up, and he was like shaking, just very, very tense shaking, and his mouth was drooling, and he had this fixed stare. I'd never seen a seizure before. I didn't know what it was. I woke my husband up and my daughter, and we all went to the emergency room together, and they said it was a night terror. So I said, okay. And so they, I think at that point we did go see, they recommended a neurologist, a pediatric neurologist, and he agreed it was a night terror. And I said, okay. And so, life was going on. Well, then he had another one. And this time, this is back in the day. This is, when would this be? 1990. I got the video camera out and I videoed the thing. And so again, went to the ER. Again, he stopped. And again, they said, it's a night terror, but you have it on film. You should take it to the neurologist so we can see it. And the neurologist said, that's a seizure.
Jeez.
So diagnosed with that, and I don't know what that means. And he said, well, it's epilepsy. Anything more than one seizure is considered epilepsy. And so we started him on medication. And so that was a whole new, he had to get blood work done periodically for that. And it was a whole management of seizures and tracking it, and medications, and what worked and didn't work. And so, yes, I was not prepared for that. And then when Madison, my daughter with autism, when she presented, it was more of her language wasn't coming in.
Okay.
And after Matthew, I was very alert to milestones, like what's supposed to happen at this age, what's supposed to happen at that age. And she was missing some speech milestones, or physically she was fine. And so I had a developmental pediatrician. I found an expert to help with that. And they did eventually diagnose her with autism. But this was in 1993, 94. And that was when they still thought autism was caused by like refrigerator moms, and it wasn't well known on how to treat.
Yeah.
But so we did what we could, and we found support with a infants and toddlers program, but they pretty much gave her just developmental delayed programs, nothing tailored to autism, because that hadn't really been discovered enough to know what treatments worked. So that was a whole nother world of disability.
Yeah.
So we had the epilepsy, we had the autism, and yeah, that was crazy. And then after Madison was born, she wasn't diagnosed until I was pregnant with Peter, and he presented with a rare blood disorder. Get this, alloimmune thrombocytopenia.
Oh my.
And so he was at risk for spontaneous bleeds. And so he was in the NICU for, I think it was 15 days. So he was actually speech delayed, but he, after with the services that he got, he wound up, he was having fluid in his ear. So he had to get tubes. And once he had the tubes in his ears, his speech started coming up, and he got back at age appropriate level very quickly. So I got so much experience in things things you never want to know about. You really don't. But that's what you have to do. You know, you want to be a good parent, so you get yourself educated. You want to provide opportunities for them, so you do research. In the process with Madison, I was able to learn about a therapy through another parent that was in Madison's class when she was 5 years old, and went to this home of the Surhoffs and to learn about this therapy. And it wound up, I wasn't the only one that didn't know about the therapy that actually helped Madison talk. And so we discovered the value of parents sharing information. And that we wound up creating a nonprofit that Pathfinders for Autism, because of this program that we went to at this friend's house. And so, good things came of it, but because you're trying to be a good parent and you're not getting good answers at the time from doctors or from educators. And so we saw the value of community. So that was a big lesson for me on how to reach out when feel like you're not getting the support you need to be the best parent you want to be.
I can only imagine how isolating it feels to be in a position where, parenthood, especially motherhood, is its own experience, its own almost isolation experience. But then to be met with things that most mothers aren't dealing with, and to not know necessarily where to go for help or how to move forward, it just must feel really lonely at times.
It was. And I think when it came to, I can remember sitting on the floor with Matthew and just really saying, what do I need? What do I need? And it's like, I just needed a path. I just needed a path, because nobody else had a child like him. Nobody else could really understand. And the neurologist, they have their expertise, but they're they have the thing they do. They medicate and they monitor.
Yeah.
They're not in the boat with you other than to just like give you their expertise, which is really limited. So yes, it can be very lonely. And that's one of the reasons that the name of our organization is Pathfinders for Autism. It's about finding a path and feeling like you're not alone, that there are other people that are struggling like you are. And there's value in the struggle when it's shared.
Yeah. Absolutely. And with autism too, I mean, I was wondering what the time frame was, because it really is such a newer thing in the public discourse. So that is its own, I feel, even again, isolating experience, not just because you're the only one dealing with it, but because there weren't a whole lot of resources about it. And, we know now autism is a spectrum, right? But like, I'm assuming that you didn't have that language back then when she was first diagnosed.
That's true. And yes, it was at that time, there was very limited internet. We didn't have Google. We didn't have any kind of social media. And so you were pretty much limited to carpool lines talking with the person next to you, the library, which there wasn't a lot of research done, valid research done at that time. So, and that was a lot of our first initiative, was just to increase awareness. And now there's tremendous awareness for it. And that makes all the difference in the world when you're looking for support.
Yeah. Oh, I can only imagine. How did you not let fear seep into every corner of your life? I mean, you have pictures on your wall. It looks like your children are thriving. How did you let them go, I guess, enough to allow that to happen, to allow them to grow up and move through the world, and for you to not just go insane in your own, head?
I think it's about one day at a time and choosing what you focus on, to be very purposeful in what you allow in your mind, in your heart, and to always keep looking forward, even if you're not moving forward, to have something to look forward to. I was and this is asked me originally, where did my story begin? And maybe it began just with the parents I have, because I really credit them for their positivity that they raised our family with. I mean, Dad's motto was, what's planned is possible. And we always had plans together. And Mom was, bloom where you're planted, wherever you are, find a way to flourish, and got to get her ducks in a row. So, and it was almost automatic with them. They could always find the positive in something. And I'm learning, not everybody has that experience in their family life where positivity is just the norm. For us to say negative things, it was allowed for sure. And anger and all those kinds of things were allowed, but it was just to seem very natural. And so fear, you have to acknowledge fear. There's no doubt about that, but you have to give it its place. And in my mature moments, I realize if I'm afraid of something, I'm getting ready to learn something. I am getting ready to learn something.
Wow.
One of the things Dad used to say, when I would be struggling, is like, BB, no experience is wasted unless you let it be. You choose what you do with that experience. You can bury it. You can ignore it. You can run from it. You can learn from it. That learning from it, even if you learn something you'll never do again, you've learned from it. And then that way it has value.
Yeah.
So our fears, I think you have to give them value, just not let them overtake you.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think, you're right. You can't ignore it. That doesn't do anything. It will just rear its ugly head, but it's how to navigate it and how to deal with it. Did you feel like you had a support system already built in because of how you grew up?
Absolutely. I grew up in a family of faith and made my commitment in the church when I was 6 years old. And I like to say, I've always been in relationship with God, but not always on speaking terms. You know, we've had our moments because I still don't understand so much, and my list of, unanswered questions is quite long, but it's an anchor for me. It's the bottom of the pit that I can push up on when I get down there. I know it's solid. So I'm very grateful for that upbringing.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I think it does make a huge difference. And having my own people in my corner that are my support system and having leaned on them for things throughout the years, I know how valuable that is. And it does make me sad and weary for people that don't have that built in to their lives, because it really does make a difference in how you walk through your life and your trials. So you're raising 4 kids.
Yes.
What's next?
So it was difficult. I had a successful career with IBM, but after the epilepsy with Matthew, I decided to stay at home. There was an early retirement program at IBM. And so I took advantage of that and was home. And then, then Madison was born with autism and Peter had his own challenges, and it took a toll on the marriage. So for 3 years, we went through counseling, and I looked at my counselor and I told him, I said, look, I either want an amazing marriage or an amazing divorce, but we're going to work through this the best we can. And after 3 years, it was apparent it needed to be a divorce. So we got through that, and I think the biggest thing I learned in going through that process was the value of communication and the value of looking at divorce from a child's perspective and what I wanted to preserve from them. And I think a lot of that had to do with how I was brought up and the role of the mom and the dad and the family unit being solid and being communicative about life. And I will say we've been able to preserve that. Still vacation together, still regularly communicate. I wanted to make it easy for my kids to continue to love their dad when he remarried, when he had children, a child, and I really tried to foster that. And that wasn't always easy for me or for her or for him. There was a lot of, it can be good. Yeah. There is a lot of work that goes on there. But 9 days after my divorce was final, I woke up with shooting pains in my legs and thought I had I wasn't sure what was going on. I thought maybe I'd worked out too hard. Anyway, I came down the steps, decided this is back when didn't email in your mortgage payments, paid my mortgage, called my doctor, and this is when doctor still answered the phone in the middle of the night and said, something's going on. I have these shooting leg pains. And he said, drink some orange juice. It's probably potassium deficiency. So I went back upstairs, and that did not help. And my daughter, Brittany, at the time was 9 years old, and she came in and said, what's going on, Mom? And I said, I've got some really weird pains in my legs. And so she helped me to the bathroom, helped me to get back in the bed. And that was the beginning of transverse myelitis, which is a rare inflammation of the spinal cord that affects 1 in a million.
Oh, jeez.
A third recover fully, a third recover partially, a third have no recovery at all. And in 6 hours, I was paralyzed from my waist down. So it was, at the time, I didn't know what was happening. I had a caregiver that had come in to help with the children, and I said, I'm going to need to go to the hospital, but I don't want the kids to see the ambulance. So can you get them to school and then call 911? And she did. And they came and got me to the hospital. I was in there for 6 weeks. They confirmed the diagnosis, and then I went home thinking, I'm going to be in that top third that get to walk again, right? I'm kind of due. So I had great hopes of walking again for about, I think I finally let go of some hope about 19 months in. I didn't get any kind of return at all, despite physical therapy twice a week and supplements and, everything you can to try to encourage return. If it's not going to come back, it's not going to come back. And so I had to adjust to life in a wheelchair. My kids were 3, 4, 7, and 9.
Oh, my word. Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. When you were paralyzed, so you're just sitting in your bed, basically, and hoping that this goes away. It's the middle of the night. When you realize that you can't move your legs, what's going through your mind at that point? Like, are you thinking this is temporary, something's wrong, but this is temporary? Are you thinking I'm in really big trouble here? The fact that you had the state of mind to get your kids off to school before having the ambulance is just, it's very mom of you.
Can't have them seeing that. I didn't know what was next, but I knew this is a memory I didn't want them to have.
Yeah.
Oh, well, it's interesting because I'd had a kidney stone.
Okay.
I mean, this is my crazy life. So when when I was pregnant with Peter, I had a kidney stone. And so, but because I was pregnant, they couldn't do anything about getting rid of it. And so when I had Peter, I wound up passing the stone after I had Peter. So anyway, so my thought was, I bet this is a kidney stone.
Oh.
So I thought, because I had this horrific pain in my back, but it shot down my legs, and then there was this tingling, numbing thing. And so my father had a lot of kidney stones. So one of the things I did was I called Dad that morning, and I said, Dad, did your kidney stones ever have shooting pains and numbness? And he said, no, no numbness and no shooting pain. I think you should call the doctor. Well, I already had. I didn't want to alarm him. I said, well, something's going on. I've got some kind of crazy kidney stone or something. So that's what I was going with, hoping that was that, because I know, that's a thing. I had no idea transverse myelitis was what had got a hold of me.
Yeah. And did you say an inflammation or an infection?
It's an inflammation.
Okay.
They're not sure exactly what kicks it off. It's one of those, it's no cause, no cure kind of thing.
Super.
So I've had epilepsy, no cause, no cure. Autism, no cause, no cure. So I've got, hat trick here of no cause, no cure.
You do.
But it's those questions, you get really good at living with them after a while, but that still doesn't mean that they don't hurt and there isn't tremendous change and uncertainty. Living with uncertainty, especially, am I going to walk again? Am I not going to walk again? What does that mean? How do I live my life? It's a lot.
Yeah. Now, at that time, did you have, as far as custody was concerned, did you have them 50-50? Because I'll just let you answer that first.
No, they lived with me.
Okay.
They lived with me. And so what my ex-husband was really good with was, he said, get the care you need. I will take care of this. And he did. And so I had to hire nannies. I had to hire people to get them where they needed to go. So I was very fortunate that he was successful and has continued to be supportive in all those ways. So, I looked back the other day and I saw my calendar, and each kid had a different colored pen with different schedules, because Madison had autism therapy and he had epilepsy, and this. And so it was just crazy, but you don't know it's crazy at the time. You just do the next thing, right? Try to do the next right thing. So my house was pretty nutty. But, we love was still there, and caring was still there, and future was still there. We were still future oriented. We didn't get stuck.
Yeah. So 2 of your kids, it seems, may have been young enough that they wouldn't have remembered before the illness, but the other 2 probably remembered you before it happened, especially your oldest being 9 years old. What was the adjustment like, just living together, having to navigate, now this is our reality and you're the only adult in that equation, you know, I imagine it's hard for kids to wrap their heads around it, especially if it's not something that they're already used to, right? Eventually you adapt, but there's that period of adapting.
You know, it's interesting. My youngest, Peter, was 3 and Brittany was 9. And Madison really doesn't have that concept.
Okay.
You know, neither did Matthew because they were severely limited. But they really, and that's part of the reason, part of the way I think that I was able to not get stuck is they were like, okay, you're in a wheelchair. I still need to go to practice. You know, I still need you to do this. I still need you to, they don't even see it. They have their own demand, and kind of the demands of their world made me not focus on myself so much.
Yeah.
In fact, it really, one of the things that happened in this adjustment process is, like I said, email was just starting to come about. And my dad had written a column about this. He called it a strange infection, you know, about my paralysis. And it was in a newspaper in my hometown in Hickory. And a college buddy read about it, who he and I had gone to high school with, but we had lost touch for, I don't know, 10, 15 years. So he emailed me, one of the few emails I ever got. And he said, you know, Becky, he said, is that you? That was the title of his email, subject of the email to me. And so I caught him up. I caught him up on my crazy life, on, you know, the marriage, and then the children one by one, and then the paralysis, and then my hopes for recovery. And I started telling him stories about the kids in the wheelchair. And one of them I told him about was Peter wanted to play soccer. I'm like, how am I going to play soccer in a wheelchair, right? So at the time I was in a manual wheelchair and I had a garage door, and I said, I got it, Pete. I said, you try to shoot into the garage and I'm going to wheel back and forth in the wheelchair and try to block you. And so he did it, and it was the craziest thing. I actually, when I wheeled in the right place, it was like I was kicking it. It's like my feet were hitting the ball that he was shooting in. So we had so much fun doing that. And so I would tell Scott, my friend that had asked me, you know, is that you, about all these stories. And so I would write this story of this, and he would share it with his parents and his friends. And I shared it with my parents and my friends. And the next thing I knew, I had people, and one of my girlfriends in North Carolina wrote me, and she goes, do you realize you have readers? Mm-hmm. I said, readers? So, and somebody else said, well, maybe you should think about publishing this, you know? And so I had another friend that knew someone at the Baltimore Sun and said, let's polish it up. And so the story about me playing wheelchair soccer with my son really launched my writing career, because It was published in the Baltimore Sun. And then from that came a weekly column called From Where I Sit, in a local weekly here that I did for 12 years. And then after my father died, I continued his column, Looking Homeward. And then I wrote another column about Tuesdays with Madison she went to another educational facility, and I visited her on Tuesdays. So because of the demands of my kids, and they're like, I don't care if you're in a wheelchair, I need your help. Their honesty, you know, it really, that was another part of the story, another pivot that happened because of you know, their needs.
Yeah. I imagine looking back, it's a gift to be able to have just the innocence of children involved in a situation like that, because it really does strip away all of the, you know, things that we put on people, that we assume about people because of, you know, what we assume are their limitations. And the innocence of children is to say, like, you're still my mom. Like, come on, let's play soccer.
Yes. And as they aged, they started to realize that, you know, it does take a little extra effort for mom to do things. And I think they're both, Peter and Brittany, are very sensitive to that. Now they're in their, you know, 30s, and they're, when I come visit, they make sure that I can get in the doorways and I have, you know, ramp accessible. So but at that age, they just needed a mom.
Yeah, absolutely. So your kids are all in their 30s now.
Yes.
And do they live like close-ish to you? Like, do you, no?
No, I've got one in North Carolina. I've got one in New Jersey. And then Madison, she still continues to be very limited. She can't read or write or ever be left alone. And so she's in a wonderful residential community with a day program that she attends. So she's not too far away. She's about 20, 30 minutes. So I can visit her pretty regularly whenever time permits. And we didn't talk about Matthew, but I lost Matthew when he was age 15. So the seizures had increased, and then his disease this undiagnosed disease became degenerative. And so at age 15, he died. So that was another one of these crazy life moments. I lost my dad in 2003, and then 2 years later, Mom had a fall and was in the hospital. And we had gone to see her, and they told us that she had some terminal things going on that we probably needed to say goodbye to her after she had been in the hospital for a while. And so I knew she was fragile. So the morning of December 11th, I got a call that my mom had died. And at the same time, Matthew had been hospitalized for some pneumonia that had set in. And that afternoon, I got a call that Matthew died. And so they both died on the same day.
Oh, my word.
It was just bizarre. So my sister, we never seemed to live ever in the same place. My sister was in Georgia at the time. And so she was going home to start. Mom and Dad lived in West Virginia. So Mom did after Dad's death. And so she was in West Virginia, going to West Virginia to start making funeral arrangements for Mom. And I called her and I said, "You're not going to believe this, but Matthew didn't make it." He'd been in the hospital many times for pneumonia before, and he always seemed to pop back. And she said this beautiful thing. She said, maybe it was Mom's time to take care of him, and that just, it made it make a little more sense. I don't know. The timing, 6 hours apart, was just so incredible in two different locations, two different hospitals, two different situations.
Yeah.
So life has been interesting.
That is quite the word for that. Yeah. Did you know that this was coming? Were you surprised when you got the call about Matthew?
Oh, yes.
Okay.
I couldn't fathom it. By that time, after I was paralyzed, and actually a little bit before that, it became obvious that he became medically fragile.
Okay.
And so he had to be in a situation where he had access to medical care. At one point, he was in a hospital, and then he moved to a specialized foster care situation. So he had always had 24/7 specialized care, and periodically he would need to go to the hospital to have things, because he had compromised breathing and that kind of thing. So it was not unexpected for him to require hospitalization. What was unexpected was the fact that he didn't survive that stay. And the timing was just unbelievable.
Truly. I mean, I do think that what your sister said is a beautiful way of looking at it, because, I'm visualizing that in my mind. And I hope that's true. I hope that's what happened. Yeah.
That's where I rest my belief in my daily thoughts of both of them.
Yeah.
That they can be together and cared for in a loving situation.
Yeah. And so that was 2005?
Yes.
Okay. Wow. So 20 years, coming up on 20 years. That's a lot of life to do after that. And how old were you at that point?
Let's see. I was 38 when I was paralyzed with the 4 kids. And that was in 1997. So 7 to 38, was that 44?
It's just so much to have lived through in really a something that things that like some people don't ever go through, right? And you've had so many crammed into the first 40 years of your life. I'm so happy that you have that outlet of writing and that it has helped other people. I know that telling our stories really does have a huge impact on other people and is such a great way to connect with people. But I can't imagine just your grief journey has been long-standing, long-suffering, and continuous. How has the past, so that's 2005, how have the past 20 years been as you've moved forward? Is there anything else coming in your story before I take this in a direction that maybe it's not going?
No, I mean, those are the highlights.
Yeah.
Low lights. I don't know. I was thinking about that.
I know.
Yeah, that's pretty much it. Yeah. You know, there is a loss, and I've been thinking about this. You know, you have these never again moments where things are one way and then something happens and never again they can be like that. And I think the last one was probably the empty nest. You know, when Brittany, moved to Seattle, and she married this amazing man. They moved to Seattle, and then they went to Milwaukee, and then they have their 3 kids. And then, my son winds up going to school on the West Coast. And so that was a lot more than I thought, in terms of just the time zone playing and the ability for me to travel out there in the wheelchair and that kind of stuff. But I wanted him to have that experience. He deserved it. He got a scholarship. He did well. But when they all are gone and have their own lives, and they're both married and have kids now, you're home alone. And for a while I had my beloved dog Trip, my little puggle that I lost 3 years ago. That was another grief journey that I had no idea would be so difficult for a dog, but man, he was in my heart.
Yeah.
And I think the thing with that dog is he experienced so much of life with me that was no longer with me, but he was. And so he knew Peter in those teenage years, and it was our common denominator. He was the puppy that Brittany and her boyfriend at the time potty trained. And I was like, that was their first parenting experience.
Yeah.
I said, yes, you guys can stay on the couch down. I'll get the dog, but you all have to potty train them. And they were up every 4 hours taking them out. And now they're these marvelous parents. And I can't help thinking my dog Trip had something to do with it.
Yes.
So that was a really another to get used to not having that dog and how much he meant to me. But yeah, I call grief a strange companion. It is just ever present. I think I've learned to honor it as really how deeply you love is how deeply you grieve. And I must have loved very deeply, because it doesn't take much to take those losses that I have on these shelves in my mind to bring them down, and the tears come very easily. And I just say, that's just your capacity to love.
Yeah.
And I think our grief is as unique as our fingerprints. I think we do it differently. I think that it can come when you least expect it. You'll have a smell or something in the environment triggers it, and it's just tapping you and saying, remember your brother used to like that, or remember your dad used to say that. And to kind of welcome it in a respectful way of, you're reminding me of a deep love I had that's part of me, even though it might physically not, be an active piece. It's a memory that you can pluck it and make it brand new again.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that that our grief is as unique as our fingerprints. I think, first of all, it's true. But I also think that speaks to why it's important that people tell their stories and their experiences.
Yeah.
Because we can relate to each other. Like, our stories rhyme, but they're not the same. So they rhyme, they're not repeated. So we can relate to each other through our stories, but we don't ever have the same experience as somebody else. And so each individual person has their own journey to walk through, their own expressions of how they've lived out their experiences. And it's a really beautiful thing to know. And again, I think it's why conversations like this are so important. And it's why I applaud anybody that gets up and tells their story as a connection point, but also as an act of courage to show other people that they can also tell their stories.
It's a very therapeutic thing to be able to say what you've experienced. And for me, the connection that it provides is vital. It brings things to life when you can talk about something and somebody say, I get what you're saying. And it's a bonus if it can ever be helpful.
Yeah.
And I figure if I've had to live this crazy life and it can be helpful to anybody, I sure better just tell it, And that's been an outlet for me. It's been, the column writing has been a wonderful outlet. The books have been something that I've got it all down in one place because it gets complicated even as I'm retelling it to you. I was like, I need to go check the book. What did I have? What year was that?
Yeah.
And what exactly was it? So it's, but I feel like, I'm kind of in a legacy mode. It's like what matters most in this life that I've lived that I want to share. And the next book I'm thinking about writing it's very simple, but it's like, I think it's what I've kind of lived. It's about losing without losing it. And how we never get through this life without some kind of loss,
Yeah.
But I like what you said about the rhyme of things. It's what are kind of the key things that you use to get through these losses that you can go to and are going to be helpful.
Yeah.
Because I think after a while you distill down what works for you and then what doesn't work for you.
Yeah.
There are healthy ways to cope and there's unhealthy ways to cope.
Certainly. Very certainly. Yes. Yeah. I think I love that, losing without losing it. I think it's something that everybody can relate to because, like you said, we don't escape this life untouched. And life is hard. And again, it's something that every human being can relate to on some level. So we don't have to have the same experiences to be able to relate to each other. So I can only imagine how an empty nest felt for you after having so much put into your children. And especially because they don't necessarily live close. But how was becoming a grandparent? What was that experience like for you?
Wonderful. It was just wonderful. And actually, my granddaughter is going to be 10 in a couple weeks. And so it was just incredible to see your child have a child. And there was this period where, because it was a little girl, there was this period I thought, she's going to be Brittany, she's just going to be just like Brittany. And she wasn't, she slept. She behaved when you went out and you could actually take her to a restaurant and, she would sleep and you could have a meal. And that just wasn't my experience with my daughter. Isn't right or wrong. It was just different. I kept thinking, well, no, she's got Brian in there too. And it's like, so it was they talk about, you enter these foreign lands and it is a very different thing. I think, somebody told me, you grow another heart. It is a different heart as a grandparent.
Yeah.
And I think for me, because I grew up in a family where I didn't know it at the time, but they were equipping me for all the challenges that I've had by their positivity, by the way they lived their life. They lived out their faith. And I want that for my grandkids too.
Yeah.
It's hard when you don't live very near each other, but we do a great job of getting together at Christmas, and we've got a big family gathering coming up where we all meet together. My ex-husband, his wife, their child, and we really enjoy, 3 or 4 days together.
That's great.
So you make the most of what you have.
Yeah, absolutely. Watching my parents become grandparents has been such a fun thing to see for them, because it really, especially my mom, it is just such a different joy that they bring, because it is a different role, obviously a grandparent versus a parent. And it's such a special connection. And I grew up being close to most of my grandparents. And so I think it is such a valuable, relationship to have if you can have it. So it's very good that you enjoy the time when you are able to have it with them. Yeah.
I've invited them. I said, so you all come up and, just we'll have some one-on-one time with the grandparents. I gave that to them one year for Christmas, just so that I could spend some time individually with them. And it didn't work out for them to come here, but I was able to go visit them.
Oh, nice.
And so it's like, okay, I'm going to give you a little money for Christmas, because I really want to see what interests them. One was Legos, one was puzzles, one was, doll, and just spend time doing their thing at that age, because, a year from now, it's going to be totally different.
Yeah.
So it is a wonderful extension of life, when you have that component to see a grandchild be a part of their life.
Wonderful. I love that. So you have all of your writing, you speak as well. What does your life look like these days?
These days, I've been doing a lot of podcasts. That seems to be, I did some book talks early on. The last book, Morning Fuel, came out in October of last year. And that's a daily reader, just a little tiny story a day based on a lot of the columns that I've written. And so I did a lot of Christmas pop-ups and stuff like that because it was a great gift to give if you wanted to kind of stay on the same page with somebody that's in a different place.
Oh, nice. Yeah.
Yeah. But I've given some talks on resilience and yes, just positivity and trying to deal with challenges. I think one of the titles was How to Stay Up When Life is Pulling You Down, that kind of thing. So I've enjoyed the group discussions and conversations. You learn a lot every time you sit down to talk to somebody.
Sure. Absolutely. Well, I applaud you for telling your story and for putting it all out there. It's not an easy story to tell, I imagine. But I do think that it matters. And I do think that there are people that have felt seen because of the things that you have shared. I firmly believe that, whoever is meant to hear these things will hear them, because I just think that it's so necessary, especially in our world today, to continue sharing these types of stories and to continue making these connections. So thank you for doing that. And I'll look forward to losing without losing it.
Yeah, we'll see how far that one gets. It took me 20 years to write the first book, but only 5 to write the second. So we'll see what this one does. You'd think I'd get better at it, but there's always more to distill down and think through. And a lot of times these conversations really help with that, to see what resonates with what people are curious about.
Yeah, absolutely. So I do have a question I ask everybody at the end of each episode, which is, through the lens of your experience, what does compassion mean to you?
Compassion. I think compassion is the capability to accept and understand where the person is coming from with an open mind, to be curious about their situation in a gentle way, not a judgmental way. But I think it's critical to have that if you're trying to be helpful to someone, not to try to fix them, but to understand and just be there for them.
Yeah.
I think what's been the most helpful thing for me is to feel sometimes not even answers, just companionship when you're going through a challenging time. And I think compassion allows you to do that.
Yeah, I agree. To walk alongside. Yeah. That's beautiful and necessary. And, I love asking this question because what we've been through informs how we see the world and how we move through the world. And so, I think your experiences open a vein of empathy and compassion that other people may not understand or may not be able to access. And in that way, it feels like a superpower to be able to hold on to that and to give it out to people and to extend it to the world. So I think it's important that we all continue to let our own experiences inform how we are compassionate to others and how we relate to others. So thank you.
Welcome. I agree. I agree.
Well, this has been such a pleasure getting to know you, getting to speak with you. I look forward to continuing to follow your writing journey and to sharing your story with my audience as well.
I appreciate that so much.
Thank you for listening to The Human Experience. If you enjoyed this episode and you'd like to help support the podcast, please subscribe, share it with your friends and family, share it on social media, and rate and review it on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. You can also support the podcast financially by going to my website, thehxpod.com, linked in the show notes, and clicking on Donate. It takes a lot of time and resources to create this podcast, so every little bit helps. Everyone has a story, and I'd love to hear yours. So be sure to check out the show notes for more information about how to stay in touch. Do good and love well.